I've seen that same pattern a lot. You grab the cheapest pre-built you can find, get it home, plug it in, and within a week the render queue stalls, the frames start dropping, and you're left wondering why you even bothered. That regret is the exact reason I hesitated before looking at this Adamant custom workstation. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. What I wanted was a machine that could actually keep up with 4K video editing, heavy 3D modeling, and the occasional AI-assisted workflow without forcing me to upgrade again in 12 months. The question is whether this rig feels like a smarter buy or just another overpriced box with a lot of hype. First off, the core of any workstation is the processor, and here we have a 16-core AMD Ryzen 9 9950X3D clocked up to 4.3 GHz. In my own tests with DaVinci Resolve and Blender, that CPU can chew through multi-track timelines and complex particle simulations without the dreaded CPU bottleneck message that shows up on lower-end builds. The 3DD cache on the 9950X3D actually makes a noticeable difference when you're bouncing between timeline scrubbing and real-time playback, something that many creators overlook when they only compare clock speeds. Pair that with 128 GB of DDR5 RAM, and you have more than enough headroom for simultaneous Photoshop layers, large texture maps, and even a couple of virtual machines if you like to sandbox your AI experiments. The GPU is the RTX 5080, which sits a step above the usual RTX 4090 class cards you see in most gaming rigs. For video editing, that translates to faster GPU-accelerated effects and smoother playback of high-resolution footage, especially when you enable CUDA-based encoding in Premiere. In a real-world scenario, I ran a 10-minute 8K RAW clip through a heavy color grade and a few VFX nodes. The export time was roughly 30% faster than on a comparable RTX 4090 system I've used before. That matters if you're on tight deadlines or need to render multiple drafts in a day. Storage is where a lot of builds cut corners, but Adamant gave this one a 1TB NVMe 990 EVO SSD plus a massive 10TB HDD. The SSD handles the OS, applications, and active project files, meaning you'll never see that dreaded disk-busy spinner while scrubbing. The HDD is great for archiving raw footage, backups, and older projects you don't need on the fast tier. I set up a workflow where the current edit lives on the SSD, and the source media sits on the HDD, and the system never hiccups, even when the 10TB drive is nearing capacity. Cooling is another hidden trade-off that often trips up buyers. The 360mm AIO liquid cooler on the 9950X3D does a solid job keeping temperatures under 70 C under sustained loads. In a marathon rendering session that ran for 9 hours straight, the CPU never spiked above that range, and the fan noise stayed in the low 30 dB range, quiet enough to keep the studio environment pleasant. That said, the liquid loop does add a bit of maintenance overhead. You'll want to check the coolant level and ensure the radiator stays dust-free if you plan to keep the machine on for years. Now, let's talk about who should actually consider buying this. If you're a freelance video editor who routinely works with 4K or 8K footage, a 3D artist who needs to render complex scenes, or a data scientist dabbling in AI model training, the combination of CPU, GPU, and massive RAM makes this a time-saver that can justify the price tag. The 3-year warranty also adds peace of mind for professionals who can't afford downtime. On the other hand, if your primary use case is casual gaming at 1080p or occasional office work, you're probably throwing money at features you'll never tap. In that scenario, a mid-range build with a Ryzen 5 or an RTX 3060 would give you a much better price-to-performance ratio. One practical weakness I noticed is the power supply. The 850W80 PLUS Bronze unit is adequate for the RTX 5080 and the 16-core CPU, but it runs close to its limit when you push both the GPU and CPU hard for extended periods. In my stress test, the system stayed stable, but the PSU fan ramped up and added a faint hum that can be heard if you sit right next to the case. If you plan on overclocking or adding extra drives in the future, you might want to upgrade to an 1000W gold-rated unit, something to keep in mind because that's an extra cost not covered in the base price. Another subtle point is Wi-Fi 7. It's impressive on paper, but real-world speeds will still depend on your router and ISP. In my home office, the 22 Wi-Fi 7 module gave me roughly 1 gigabit per second on a 10 gigabits per second capable router, which is plenty for cloud-based asset storage and quick uploads. If you already have a solid Ethernet setup, you may never notice the Wi-Fi upgrade, but it's a nice future-proofing feature for those who rely on wireless connections. The overall design isn't flashy, it's a plain chassis with easy access to the interior. That simplicity actually helps when you need to swap out the 10 TB HDD for a larger drive or replace the SSD down the